You know, folks, the whole world is talking about Bitcoin. Want to know why? Maybe it's because Bitcoin rose in value over 150% last year, and this is just the beginning. Bitcoin is online investing that anyone can do. Visit bitcoinuniversity.org today. Take a master class. Download the Book of Bitcoin and take your investment portfolio to the next level. Visit bitcoinuniversity.org and discover all that a Bitcoin can do for you. That's bitcoinuniversity.org, bitcoinuniversity.org.
From Wall Street to the White House, this is the Larry Kudlow Show.
So, one of the things that President Trump is going to deal with is the issue of unfair trading practices, where so many countries have very, very high tariffs, much higher than we do, and that damages key aspects of our economy, including manufacturing and the industrial areas of the Midwest and so forth. We bring in Clete Willems, former deputy director of the National Economic Council, former White House trade negotiator, now partner of Akin Gump, a dear friend of mine. Clete, thanks for doing this. I want to read something. I've carried this around with me. You wrote this quick memo back in July, but I'm just going to read it. The European Union average tariffs are 50% higher than the U.S., China's tariffs are more than twice as high. Vietnam's tariffs are 3 times as high. Brazil's tariffs are 3.5 times as high. India's tariffs are over 5 times as high as ours. And the World Trade Organization, WTO, permits them to do this. All right? So it just strikes me there's something very unfair about this, and something needs to be done. So what are you thinking about?
You're absolutely right, Larry. I don't know whoever wrote that memo knew what he was talking about. But this is the truth. And President Trump has really put his finger on this, which is that we've sleepwalked into an international trading system that isn't totally fair to the United States. And maybe there was a point in time when, coming out of World War II and coming out of these global crises, we needed to help other countries grow. But now we're in a very competitive situation, and it just doesn't make sense for us to have lower tariff rates than everyone else around the world. And so, what I hope can happen here is that when we start moving forward, looking at our tariff rates, other countries come to the table and say, you know what, you're right, there is a better way forward. But, that we don't know yet. And that's where I hope this goes. But I think President Trump is absolutely right to put this on the table, because it's a situation that's been going on for too long, and it just doesn't make sense in this global economy.
It's just the global trading system is broken. It's just broken. The World Trade Organization is broken. In fact, somebody, may have been you, somebody said that actually only WTO decisions have been against the United States, even though everybody has higher tariffs. And, of course, China gets away with murder. I mean, there's some talk about ending the normalization of trade with China. And there's always talk about pulling out of the WTO. But what do you think? I mean, do we need a broad-based tariff here? Or should we have individual bilateral discussions? Mr. Trump is quite a good trade negotiator, as we know. He's adept at using tariffs. He also believes in reciprocity. He would love to see others bring down their tariff rates. Not always that we have to bring up our tariff rates. I mean, what's the best way out of this dilemma? Because eventually it wears us down, and it will hurt selected industries, and it will hurt the industrial Midwest, and they have been hurt in the last 25 years.
That's right, Larry, and you make a really good point. And people often ask me, what is it that President Trump's trying to do here? Is he really trying to raise tariffs on everyone, or is he really trying to use this as a negotiating tool? And I tell him the answer is both. Right. And what really makes him so effective and such a good negotiator is he's willing to put those things on the table and see what happens. And the way I see it is he's got a series of objectives, right? He wants broad-based American growth. He wants more manufacturing here. He He wants to be able to combat those unfair practices so our industries don't get hurt. And he wants more reciprocity. He wants more fairness across the board. And so he puts these ideas, these big tariffs on the table. He leaves it to his team to go figure out, should I do the tariffs, or can you get me a deal that's going to better achieve my objectives? And so we don't always know going in which way it's going to go. And so like I said before, I hope that when he puts these things on the table, we've got countries who don't act offended and act like the U.S. is the bad one here, but actually step up, try to make this stuff more fair, because that's the better way for all of us. But I do think to the extent that countries aren't going to get rid of those unfair practices, I think we're going to have some tariffs.
I mean, I'm not optimistic, Clete, about China. I mean, I don't even know. I don't know. Perhaps you know. I've talked to our friend Bob Lighthizer. He doesn't know. The Phase 1 deal that we all worked on 4 or 5 years ago and signed documents amidst much publicity and ballyhoo, but I don't know whether they've lived up to it. I don't know if they've stopped stealing our intellectual property. I don't know if they've stopped the forced transfer of technology. I don't think they bought the commodities the way we specified in that Phase 1 deal. China's going to be a problem, and wouldn't surprise me if he slapped on big tariffs on China, Clete.
Yeah, I think you're right, Larry. And the real problem here is not only China. I mean, China is a problem. But the problem is we've had a lethargic trade policy for the last 4 years where we worked really hard to get that deal. COVID came, which was unfortunate. The timing was really unfortunate there. The ink was barely dry. And then the Biden folks came in and they just threw this thing out the window. And they didn't really hold China's feet to the fire. So actually, I do think one of the first things that President Trump could or could consider doing is going back to China and saying, look, we had this deal. Are you actually going to follow through? Because if you don't, I'll enforce it. And that means that you're going to have tariff hikes. And I really think that's the only way to test, whether there's a different path with China or whether we're going to just keep going down this road. And I mean, I agree with you. It's hard to be super optimistic about it. But I think in many ways, if we come in and we have someone who's actually willing to enforce the deals we negotiate, we can get a sense of where we're at and try to figure out if there is another path.
I think he'll certainly threaten a tariff on Mexico on their exports if they don't help us remain in Mexico. Because he had to do the same thing with AMLO. The new president, her name Scheinbaum. I'm not sure what her name is. Maybe you know her name. But,
That's right.
But anyway, the point is, if she doesn't play ball with us, Trump will do just what he did 4 or 5 years ago and threaten huge tariffs on Chinese exports. NAFTA, I know we have a deal with NAFTA, USMCA, but the reality is remain in Mexico. Here's an example of using tariffs to deal with a non-trade issue.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting. And I think President Trump does understand the leverage that those tariff measures give him. And in some ways, Larry, I do think using the tariff tool is better than overusing the sanctions tool. I know how important it is to you and others. We need to keep the dollar the world's reserve currency. We don't want to undermine that. And sometimes when you over-sanction, that calls that into question. And so if you use tariffs instead, you've got a tool of leverage that can achieve a lot of the same goals without some of the downside risk. And so I think it's an interesting approach. Mexico, though, I will say that the problems go beyond immigration. And you were asking about China before. One of the big problems of Mexico is you've got a lot of Chinese companies who are investing there and then trying to use that to get around the 301 tariffs and to sell into the United States. And so I do think that that's a real serious conversation that we're going to have with Mexico as well, which is, you are part of the North American supply chain. That's great for our economy. That's important for our economy, but you can't become a conduit for backdoor subsidized Chinese goods.
Yeah, what are we going to
have a tough talk with them?
Yeah, what are we going to do about that? We got to do something about that. And China is incorrigible anyway, sending over the raw materials for fentanyl through Mexico and the drug cartels. But Chinese cars and other manufacturers, they're trying to kind of under the wire of the USMCA trade deals. I mean, something's got to be done about that.
Yeah, you're right. And luckily, we were very creative and innovative. And as you'll remember, when we renegotiated NAFTA and we created USMCA, we put in place a provision that we haven't had in any other trade agreement before, which is that we have to review it after 6 years and look at how well it's working. And so, between Lighthizer and President Trump and the whole team, we've got this built-in leverage that doesn't exist in any other agreements. And I think we're going to have to use that to try to solve some of these problems.
That's an interesting point. I forgot about that. So so the review would be when, Clete? 26?
So the deadline, yes. The deadline is July 2026 to make that decision. And I think one of the things President Trump and his team can do is coming in is start to have those conversations that by the time we get to 2026, hopefully we have a solution. But that's the way that it works. And it's like I said, it has never been done before. But as you know, we got creative and we were trying to find new ways to solve some of these longstanding problems.
Last minute, Clete Willems. Does USMCA work? Has it worked? Has it been good for the U.S.?
I think on average, it definitely has. And remember, we're talking about the problems and people focus on the problems, but we had a lot of other things in there across a whole range of sectors that were unique, the IP rights, the digital policies. And so I think on average, we still have a very vibrant North American trade. That doesn't mean that there aren't problems that we need to address. So I think USMCA was a success, a bipartisan success. But there's still problems, and that's what we're going to be dealing with in the years ahead.
All right. Nobody knows it better than Clete Willems, who himself was a great trade negotiator, deputy director of the National Economic Council. He's with Akin Gump now. Thanks, Clete. Appreciate your wisdom. Folks, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to talk to Legal Beagle Greg Jarrett. Isn't it interesting? A Trump landslide ended all of the weaponization and lawfare against Mr. Trump. How fascinating. Greg Jarrett up next. I'm Kudlow. We'll be right back.
Larry Kudlow.
Eden Memorial Chapels understands Jewish funerals can take many forms. Some are Orthodox, while others are more conservative or of a Reformed nature. There's no one better. With services close to all New York and New Jersey cemeteries, Eden Memorial Chapels offer fair and balanced pricing and can provide easy transfer of you and your loved ones to Israel. While you're grieving, they're here to take care of all the details so that you deal with less bureaucracy and have more peace of mind. Go to EdenMemorial.com. That's EdenMemorial.com.